When my twin brother Alex and I were kids, our parents used to take us on a lot of road trips, and not just during the summer, but also at various points throughout the year. Most of the time we'd go to big cities, national parks, or other landmarks, but we'd stop at many places along the way. In fact, my parents had a habit of making a lot of impromptu stops based on billboards and other road signs. For example, one time we were driving cross-country and saw the sign for a hot tub sale and extravaganza, and our parents started laughing and decided to take a 15-minute detour off the road. To be clear, I don't think our parents were in the market for a new hot tub. They just were, and still are, somewhat eccentric people. I bring these details up because I have no idea where this memory takes place, and given our style of vacationing, it could have happened literally anywhere. I even doubted it was real, but we talked about it recently, and Alex remembers this happening too. In any case, it is the strangest and most surreal experience I've had in my life. I think we were just returning from one of our longer road trips, sometime in the fall when we were about 6 years old, and I think we may have just visited the Grand Canyon. We were still about a day's drive away from our house. Unfortunately, Alex and I had gotten colds, and our mother insisted on giving us Tylenol and Benadryl, so we were already a little out of it. We checked out of a hotel earlier that morning and had been driving down a mostly deserted highway for about 2 hours. Then I remember our parents discussing something. I'm not sure if they had seen a billboard or if this is something our dad had looked up in advance. I remember our mom looking back at us and then telling our dad it would probably be best for us to drive straight home, and then he said something like, they could just stay in the car and we wouldn't make it back today anyway. Alex and I were zoning out, watching the DVD player in our mom's minivan. It was some movie where this group of people used a laser to pop a huge amount of popcorn in some dude's house, and honestly, just watching it was kind of a surreal experience in and of itself. We might have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I remember was Alex telling our parents he had to pee and our mom parking at McDonald's and us going inside. We ate there and our dad let us play in the playscape, over the slight objections of our mom. Eventually we got back in the minivan and then made a detour off the highway. We drove to what I guess was a more industrial area, with big warehouse-type buildings. My dad pulled into this parking lot with other cars in it and told us we could just check things out and head back in a few minutes. I can't remember what, if anything, Alex and I said to him, and we just coughed and blew our noses and got out of the minivan. My parents and Alex and I walked to the front of the building, which was covered with glass. We walked inside to this big reception-type area with these big colorful posters, and to this day I still have no idea what this place or event they were having was. Maybe our dad wanted to keep it a surprise, or maybe he explained it to us, but if so, then we forgot. Eventually, this younger woman in a suit came out one of the hallways leading off from the area and greeted my mom and dad enthusiastically. I remember something about my dad apologizing that we arrived rather late, and the lady assuring him that it hadn't started yet. Again, I don't know what it was. Next, she walked over in front of me and Alex and bent down and asked us if we wanted to explore the display room. I'm pretty sure we agreed, and my mom looked a bit embarrassed because we were sick. The lady smiled and pointed to one of the hallways and told us it was right through there. Alex and I started walking down the hallway out of curiosity, with our mom following behind. I think our dad was still asking the lady questions, but I'm not sure. The hallway was pretty generic, with white tile, white painted walls, and those white ceiling tiles on the ceiling. I remember walking down about 50 feet and seeing this bright green and blue light coming into view. As we got closer, we saw it was coming through an open set of double doors, and Alex and I ran the last part there and out into this huge open dome-shaped area. The best way I can describe it is like a skybox in a video game, with a blue sky and white clouds painted on the ceiling and light shining on them. The floor was a combination of the same type of tile as in the hallway with astroturf, and there was a podium and some kind of machine in the middle of the room, with concentric rows of white painted wooden chairs moving out. Alex and I started running to the thing in the middle, but our mom yelled at us to stop. We looked around, baffled by this outdoor-appearing indoor area, and noticed several other halls and doorways by the edges of the room. We walked back to where our mom was still standing in the hallway, and she scolded us, but a moment later someone called to her from back in the foyer area, and she told us to wait right there. But nothing could have prepared us for what was about to happen next. In a mix of confusion and excitement, Alex and I took a few steps back into the domed room and looked up at the fake clouds again. A few seconds later, we heard a low-pitched voice say something like, "Hey, do you see it?" It seemed like it came from the opposite side of the room, out of view from behind the machine and podium, but a moment later Alex nudged me and pointed. There, standing at the entrance to one of the other hallways, was a figure. Now I say figure because what we saw looked way too tall to be a regular human. Maybe it was just the style of painting in the room that was throwing us off, but whoever that was looked to be at least 7 feet tall. They were also wearing some kind of suit, like a bunny suit or a bear suit, but it had this beak attached to the face part and it looked rather grotesque. Alex and I froze, and I think I whispered to him, "Let's get out of here." As if that thing could read my mind, he started walking towards us. But it wasn't a regular walk. He was taking these big, exaggerated steps, and the rate at which he was approaching freaked us out. We screamed, then ran back down the hallway to the foyer. When we got there, the receptionist lady and our mom were looking at us, and our mom told us sternly to be quiet. Alex started telling them about the person in the costume, and while I'm still not sure whether our mom and the lady believed us, our mom did look embarrassed. Just then our dad came walking back from somewhere. Maybe he was in the bathroom, I don't know, and our mom took him aside. A moment later he started thanking the lady for letting us stop by, and then told us we were leaving. Our dad didn't seem upset. Maybe our mom went easy on us because she knew we were sick and had taken Benadryl. I remember getting back into the car, but the next thing I remember after that is waking up at night in bed in our house. Our parents must have driven straight through, or else my mind blocked out what happened immediately after we left that place. In any case, Alex and I didn't bring it up again, at least until about a month ago. That's when Alex and I were having a bro chat with some of our friends from high school, and the topic of strange dreams came up. The look Alex shot me when I described that place said it all. After that discussion, Alex and I sat down and legit had a conference, trying our best to figure out what the hell that place was. Eventually we asked our parents, and while they described different quirky attractions we'd visited, including some Alex and I had forgotten about, nothing seemed to match our memories. Ultimately, I guess it's possible this really was a dream, and one of us told the other about it, and then they had a similar dream and we both got confused. But now that we've had these discussions, and especially since I've written it down, I feel like 95% sure this did in fact happen. But just as sure as I am that it happened, I have no idea what this place was, or who that person in the costume was. Both Alex and I are in good agreement that he said, "Hey, do you see it?" But neither of us know what it was referring to, and why that person apparently came after us. And ultimately, we'll probably never know. When I was in the 3rd grade, my best friend was Hal, and he had 2 sisters, Jenny and Clara, who were a few years younger than us. I'd hang out at his house and have sleepovers there occasionally, and when I slept over, his mom would usually take us out to eat somewhere and do something fun afterwards. This one night, which I think was a weekday during the summer, I was over at Hal's house and we were all having pizzas. Hal's dad mentioned that a new climbing and acrobatics place opened up and it looked like it was for kids, and Jenny and Clara immediately got interested. Apparently Hal's parents had been planning to enroll them in some kind of physical activity, so they had been on the lookout for different places they could take them. Hal and I kind of wanted to check it out, and long story short, Hal's mom drove us over after dinner to see what was there. This place, which I think was called something like Bob's Jumping Ground, was located in a large warehouse-like building that was just off the highway. But I don't think it was actually in an industrial area. There were other businesses catering to kids in similar buildings next to it, including an indoor soccer arena, a music recital place, and a large indoor area with a playscape and other toys for younger kids. Hal's mom pulled up and we all got out as she yelled at Jenny and Clara not to run across the parking lot. As we made our way to the doors, we noticed some construction vehicles with padding and tubing in the back. Apparently the place was still under construction. The moment Hal's mom opened the door, we were all smacked in the face with an extremely pungent lemon odor. I'm not sure if it was pine sol, but it took us all off guard and I almost gagged. The inside of this place was also very dim. The front room had a long counter with chairs and a computer behind it, and it had a row of chairs in front of the windows and a vending machine at one end. Hal's mom stepped up to the counter and looked around, then after about 10 seconds asked if anyone was there. A moment later, some skinny woman in her 30s came out from the doorway behind the counter and walked over to where we were standing. I immediately got weird vibes from her. For one thing, she had this huge smile on her face, and for another, she walked and then talked rather quickly. She greeted Hal's mom and then enthusiastically looked at us and asked if we wanted to jump around. Where exactly we'd be jumping, I didn't know at that moment. Hal's mom told her it was our first time here and we just wanted to check things out and see what they had. In that same overly enthusiastic manner, the lady started nodding and told his mom of course as she walked out from behind the desk. She asked us to follow her through another door and let us into this big room. It was about the size of a basketball court, and there were rock walls along the edges that looked to be of varying difficulty. There was also a big fake rock in the middle of the room with a ladder and some other ways to get on top of it. Most of the floor was covered in gym mats. I guess it was pretty typical of places like this, but something still felt off. The overhead lights were still quite dim, and as far as I could tell, we were the only ones there. Hal's mom asked the lady if there were any classes specifically geared to younger children to learn to climb and get physical activity, and she motioned to Jenny and Clara. The lady guiding us loudly said, "Yes, yes, yes," and proceeded to describe some kind of after-school activity program that met a few times a month. Then she led us to a doorway on the opposite side of the room. I looked at Hal and saw him smiling, and we were both about to crack up with how weird this lady was. Jenny and Clara were just following along, talking about something else, and didn't seem super interested anymore. The doorway led to a hallway with that cheap type of carpet and walls painted all in white, and the walls didn't look completely straight either. We walked a short distance and then came out into another room. This one was legit, almost pitch black, and for a second I thought the lady was going to turn on some lights. But she didn't though, and just started talking about how they use these modular blocks that connected on the ends to make unique obstacle courses. I know this is a pretty obscure reference, but if anyone has ever played Bug on the Sega Saturn, it kind of looked like one of the levels. For those who don't know, Bug was an early 3D/2.5D platformer where individual blocks were connected together to make paths in different areas you could explore. After standing there shrouded in darkness, Hal's mom actually asked if they could turn on more of the lights, and no lie, the lady said no. She told us some BS about how the circuit breaker blew a few nights ago and an electrician was coming out the next day. I have no idea about whether or not that was true, but at this point I think Hal's mom was starting to get concerned. While we were still just standing there, Hal's mom politely said we'd seen enough and thanked the lady for showing us around, and this is where things move from slightly creepy to moderately terrifying. In that same tone of voice, the lady asked Hal's mom what class she'd like to sign up for, and I could see she was taken aback by that question. Hal's mom looked at Jenny and Clara and then back at the woman and did her best to smile and say that they need some time to discuss it as a family. Then the lady said if they signed up right now she could give them a 15% discount. This actually went on for a few minutes, with Hal's mom trying her best to be polite and growing more uncomfortable as she tried to back out and the lady kept pressing her to sign up. Then when this was going on, Hal nudged me and said, "Dude, did you see that?" At first I had no idea what he was talking about. Then I noticed movement near another doorway about 10 feet away. Apparently the door had just been opened, because I don't remember realizing there was a door there before. Without thinking, I took a few steps closer and saw several dudes moving stuff around in a small, still dimly lit room. I couldn't quite tell what they were moving, but it didn't seem like they were in any kind of aerobics class. There was also another odor, not lemony, but more foul. All of a sudden I heard someone yell something, and a man appeared at the door. He looked older, thin but not really fit, and his face looked sunken in. A moment after he appeared, the door slammed shut. Thank God that man yelling and slamming the door finally gave Hal's mom the courage to break off the conversation and demand that we needed to leave. The lady kept talking, now in a more condescending manner, and Hal's mom actually took Hal and Clara by the hand as she led us back through the first room and out of that place. That lady stayed like 5 feet behind us the entire time we were leaving, but luckily she didn't follow us outside. Over Clara's protests, Hal's mom told her frantically to get in her car seat as the rest of us strapped in. Then Hal's mom quickly got inside and started the car while continuing to monitor the doors we just walked out of. We left, and needless to say, none of us ever went back to that place. Hal and I didn't tell his mom or sisters about what we saw in that other room, but later on that night we tried to figure out what could have been going on. Maybe you've guessed it already, but our main theory, which we still believe to this day, is that those people were making meth, and the business was just a front for the operation. I actually started watching Breaking Bad partly due to this experience, and with the smells and how the people there looked and acted, I'm like 95% sure that's what was going on. Regrettably, we never told anyone, mostly because we weren't entirely sure, but also because we didn't want those people to come after Hal's family. I think the business actually closed down a few months later anyway, and I have no idea if the police investigated it at all. I still think about what happened from time to time, including the fact that we almost came face to face with someone who was probably cooking meth. And I shudder to think about what they might have done to us if they thought we found out about what they were doing. I don't even know where to start with the story. It's the strangest thing that ever happened to me, and to this day I'm not 100% sure this wasn't a prank that other people were in on. I guess in the end it doesn't matter, but I can't help but think about it sometimes. For backstory, my name is Ben, and it was the end of my first semester in college. I was doing mechanical engineering, and as I took a fair amount of AP courses in high school, I already had some credits, and so my schedule was a bit different. I ended up taking an elective to get it off my plate. It was Roman history. The class was a lot of reading and looking over notes, and I tried to get an A, but it honestly wasn't too bad. The first or second week there, while I was still just getting my bearings, I ran into this other student named John. He was a little bit older, maybe in his early 30s, and this was actually his last semester before graduation. I won't share a lot of personal details, but suffice it to say his schedule just worked out this way, and this was one of the last 2 classes he needed to graduate. I forget exactly what program John was in, but I think he went to work for the Department of Education, or something like that, after getting his bachelor's. John was a really outgoing guy and had kind of a class clown type of vibe, and would routinely crack jokes in the back of the lecture hall. To be honest, it helped keep me awake, and as the weeks passed, I appreciated it more and more. John and a few of his friends asked me to come with them to parties a few times, but personally that wasn't really my scene, and I was pretty academically focused that first year. John did, however, finally talk me into going kayaking with him one Saturday, which incidentally was after finals, and right before he was moving somewhere to start his job. He joked that he was going to show me the secret area and pass down the wisdom that another student had once given to him. Apparently it wasn't just for kayaking, but also for grilling, drinking, and having parties. Though like John said, it was supposedly a secret and almost no one knew about it. There was apparently this waterfall type area that you could ride a tube down, which honestly made me a bit uneasy. I pressed him for details, but he wouldn't say any more, which made me even more nervous. However, as I'd been busting my butt and didn't have anything else to do, I figured why not. John told me he'd drive me over there and that it would just be the 2 of us, and he told me to bring a cooler with stuff for burgers and hot dogs and a tube. John said he had 2 kayaks and would bring snacks and a grill, and I strongly suspected he'd have beer as well. So, the Saturday after finals, I left my dorm room carrying my backpack, cooler, and inner tube, along with a battery-powered inflator. It was a nice cool morning, and foggy as well. I walked to our main parking lot, and sure enough, there was John's older blue Honda Civic with 2 kayaks and paddles strapped to the top. I waved and walked to the rear passenger side door to set the stuff down, but when I opened the door, I was shocked to see this smoking hot chick. I immediately took my hand off the door and stepped back, almost dropping the cooler and tube. The girl, who was a solid 10, looked at me with an embarrassed smile, and then I heard John laugh from the driver's seat. He told me he hoped he didn't mind that I brought someone else along, and I managed to say something like, "No, it's good." I didn't know if I should shut the door or not, so I slowly pushed it back and then walked around and opened the trunk. When I did, John looked over his shoulder and said, "Ben, meet Amanda." We awkwardly made eye contact, and I still didn't know what to do. I said hey in a low voice, and then finished putting my backpack in. Right when I was about to close the trunk, John said he put the grill in the front seat, so I'd have to sit in the back with Amanda. I knew now that he or someone else had put him up to this, and their idea of fun was to see if they could make some nerdy engineering student score a date. I opened the door and took a seat, trying to avoid eye contact with Amanda. John asked, "Are you good, bro?" And I just nodded. Amanda coughed, and I looked over to see her acting nervous and embarrassed as well. I was about to say something when John chimed in and told me that Amanda was in his same department, and he wanted to bestow the secret knowledge upon her as well. At this point, I honestly didn't know what he meant by that, and I only said something like, "Yeah." As we pulled out of the parking lot, John finally told me where exactly we were going, which was apparently a water reservoir that was owned by the city or state or something. It was about a 30-minute drive there, and John said we'd have to load the stuff and kayak over in order to get to the best spot. I pulled it up on Google Maps and saw a dirt road cutting through a wooded area, leading to a rectangular retention pond about the size of 2 football fields. As we weren't in a drought and it had recently rained, I suspected the reservoir would be relatively full. I looked for the spot John was talking about, and on the opposite side from the road was an overspill area that led down to a smaller reservoir and creek beneath it. I guess that was where we were going. Needless to say, the car ride over was still awkward, and I'm not sure if John's attempts at making conversation starters were helping or hurting. At least I felt like Amanda, who went by Mandy, and I were in the same boat, and that John talked each of us into going without the other one knowing. Little did I know that we were about to be in the same boat literally as well. John finally pulled off the highway, which was a relief as I wasn't the biggest fan of his driving, and onto this deserted 2-lane road. After another mile or so, he took a turn onto this random dirt road that had a sign that said, "Government property, no trespassing." There wasn't a gate or fence or anything, so John just drove in, and turned around and winked as he did. Mandy and I exchanged a nervous glance and smiled. I had figured before that we probably weren't supposed to be here, so it wasn't a surprise. The dirt road was pretty narrow at places, and with the fog and the thick forest, it was kind of eerie. John didn't slow down much during the curves, leading Mandy and me to tense up a bit in our seats, but we eventually made it to the pond. It felt good to get out on solid ground, and the view was actually quite peaceful. The sides of the pond were made of rocks, and the fog hung low over the completely still water, to the point you could only see about 50 feet away. I opened the trunk, and Mandy and I got the stuff out as John unlatched the kayaks and paddles and got them off the rack. We set everything down on the water's edge and started loading the kayaks. Each of them fit 2 people and had a spot for cargo in the middle. John put the grill along with the charcoal and lighter fluid in one kayak, and told Mandy and me to put the rest of the stuff in the other one. Right when we finished strapping things down, John dragged his kayak into the water and told us he'd race us over there. I'd honestly been expecting that, and it was not out of character whatsoever. As he paddled quickly to get a head start, Mandy and I exchanged glances. It was the first time we were alone together on this whole trip, and it was still awkward. I started to apologize and tell Mandy I was sorry she got roped into this, but she put her hands up and started laughing. Then I asked her how she knew John, as I didn't completely buy part of an explanation he gave earlier. She told me that they were in fact both in the College of Liberal Arts, and that he was one of the orientation leaders. I laughed, imagining John in that situation, and Mandy did too. All that was left was to push the kayak into the pond and follow John over. I put my phone in a waterproof case and hooked it onto one of the straps with the carabiner. I asked Mandy if she wanted to put her phone there too, and she agreed. Then she took off the shirt and shorts she was wearing over her bikini and put her clothes in another bag and hooked it on too. Now, I don't want to comment too much about her appearance, but I'll just say that I felt a little uncomfortable around her, especially since we had just met. I decided to sit in front, so she wouldn't get the sense I was watching her. I think I was doing most of the paddling and initially tried to keep up with John, but eventually we fell further behind and the sound of his rowing faded into the distance. Maybe that was part of John's plan, I don't know. Luckily, Mandy and I managed to strike up a good conversation, and I felt more relaxed. Maybe it was the bizarreness of the situation, or maybe it was the cool mist and calm water. After a few minutes, we stopped paddling completely to take in the ambiance. We were alone, and aside from the ripples of our own kayak, the water was completely still. I could just barely hear the sound of John kayaking far off ahead of us, and besides that, things were silent. Mandy and I got our phones out and took some pictures. Apparently she was a big fan of so-called liminal spaces, which I hadn't heard about up to that point, but which I also enjoyed after she explained the concept to me. We sat there for several minutes talking, and Mandy was pretty cool. Eventually we started paddling forward again into the mist, and soon rocks came into view. However, it wasn't a straight line of rocks, like one of the edges of the pond. Instead, it seemed like just some random outcropping in the middle of the water. Mandy and I started paddling closer, but then she let out a scream. A moment later I saw what she was looking at. There, maybe 20 feet back, was a red object. I squinted my eyes and saw what appeared to be a red curved piece of metal with a flag on the side, kind of like a mailbox. But it was like 6 feet tall, and instead of the front of the mailbox and the post, there was a tan-colored mask and a figure standing in a tan-colored robe underneath it. The object, or whoever was inside of it, was completely silent and motionless. Instinctively I started to paddle slowly away, and Mandy followed my lead. 10 seconds later, and the figure was now out of view from the fog, and Mandy whispered in a low voice, "Was that John?" I was about to ask her the same question, and for a moment it crossed my mind that she and him were trying to pull some kind of epic prank on me. However, her reaction had seemed genuine, and either John would have had to somehow hide that costume in the grill, or else move it over beforehand. But the biggest thing arguing against this being a prank was the fact that this wasn't even where we had been going. It was just some random location in the middle of the pond. I told Mandy I don't think that was John, and we both kept paddling. Then Mandy let out another scream, and my blood ran cold when we heard one big splash from behind us. Then we heard the sounds of someone swimming towards us. We both started freaking out and paddled like our lives depended on it. We kept going for another 5 minutes straight until finally the rock wall came into view. We rode right up onto it, and then I got out, pulled the kayak further onto the rocks, and helped Mandy out. For a moment we just stood there, and as the sound of the waves against the rocks settled down, we were left with silence. Just as when we started, all we could see was the fog hanging over the still water. Mandy and I decided to take our stuff and leave the kayak. We put our socks and shoes back on, and then I grabbed my backpack and cooler while she got the bags with her clothes and our phones. We did our best to walk quickly and quietly across the rocks, which were about the size of beach balls, towards where we thought the spill area would be. A minute or two later I stopped and told Mandy to be quiet. It was music, and it sounded like it was coming from somewhere below us. Cautiously we walked a little bit further, and sure enough the spillway came into view, with John's kayak sitting on the rocks nearby. There was a little concrete inlet in the rock wall, and a small amount of water was flowing down the concrete slab on the other side, which went down at about a 30-degree angle. We didn't bother to inflate the tube, and instead just walked down on the rocks. The music got louder, and we heard the creak as well. Eventually we spotted John sitting on a log next to the grill, which he had set up about 20 feet away from the bottom of the concrete slab. When he saw us, he grinned from ear to ear and joked about how it had taken us so long to catch up, and asked us how we had been doing. Mandy and I looked at each other, initially not knowing what to say. I'm not sure if John thought we had been fooling around, but I think he picked up on the fact that something wasn't right. I told him we saw something in the pond, all the while studying his reaction. John asked what it was, and I explained how Mandy and I came across this random pile of rocks, and how there was someone wearing what appeared to be a Mailbox costume. John started to laugh, but then stopped when Mandy and I didn't start laughing with him. We just stood there awkwardly for a few moments. The best I could tell, John was being genuine and had no idea who or what we had seen on the lake. Eventually John asked us if we needed to head back, and after considering how quickly that person had come after us, I said, I think that's best. John hadn't lit the charcoal yet, so we helped him put it back in the bag and carry the stuff back up to the top. We secured them to John's kayak, and he got in and paddled next to us as Mandy and I walked back to our own kayak. All the while we remained silent so we could hear anyone coming towards us. Eventually we reached our kayak, and nothing looked like it had been tampered with. Mandy and I hooked on our stuff and got in and started paddling back with John. We made sure to stick close to the far side of the pond so as to avoid the pile of rocks that had the person in the Mailbox costume on it. Eventually we reached the other side, and after hugging the wall for another minute or two, John's car came into view. We got out of the kayaks, dried off with some towels in John's car, and loaded everything up. Mandy put her clothes back on over her bikini, and we got inside. At this point, it was the late afternoon, and we were all pretty hungry. We stopped at this taco place John knew about on the way back, and by that time, Mandy and I had started to relax about what had happened. John even started joking about it, tossing out various theories. At one point, he mentioned the idea of some crazy Mailbox cult, and though I think we all acknowledged the possibility that we really had stumbled across a cult of some sort, we managed to laugh. John dropped me back off in my dorm parking lot, but only after he made me promise him to not let all the meat go to waste. Then as I was leaving, he insisted I take the grill, charcoal, and lighter fluid, claiming it would make it easier for him to move out. I doubted that was the real reason, and also doubted I was allowed to have it in my dorm, but I took it anyway. One thing I didn't do that I had already started to regret was asking for Mandy's number, but honestly given how strange the situation was, and how we weren't alone after meeting up with John, it hadn't seemed right. I did, however, plan to ask John about her, but that didn't even happen, as when I got back to my dorm, I checked my phone to see a text from an unknown number. It was Mandy. Apparently John had given her my number. My heart skipped a beat when I read she had a good time and wanted to hang out again, joking that we should go to a place where nothing weird happens. And the rest is history. John moved away several days later, and I never saw him again. I didn't know that much about his personal life, and I never kept up with him after he left, but I hope he's enjoying his new career. Mandy and I went to a bowling alley near campus for our second date, or our first date, depending on how you consider things. We really hit things off, and have been together for the last 4 years. 2 months ago I popped Mandy the question, and she said yes, and our wedding date is in June. Maybe that's what made me randomly consider sharing the story, coupled with the fact that Mandy got me hooked on liminal spaces. In any case, that trip to the pond with John still stands out as the strangest thing in my life, but since it was how I met Mandy, one of the most wonderful things as well. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some tiny doubt in the back of my mind that what happened was an elaborate prank, and John and/or Mandy were in on it, but I guess it doesn't matter. I fully intend to get back in contact with John and invite him to our wedding. I think it all just goes to show that life can be full of bizarre situations, but sometimes they can work out better than you could have ever expected.